Dragon Meridians, Airship Dragons, Book 2, by Amy Campbell.
Chapter 1. Keep an open mind. Danelore. The sound of a dog barking echoed through the tunnels of Outcast Island. At first, Dane had almost mistaken it for a sea lion, but as it continued, he realized the error. This had a deeper sound, though it was no doubt reverberating throughout the tunnel system. "What in the winds is a dog doing here?" Dane murmured. The island was supposed to be uninhabited. It had been during his stay here in previous migration seasons, and though it had most recently been used to house the prisoners of the Jade Court, all of the survivors had been either relocated to Jadefire Island or killed after the battle over the dragon who isn't. The echoing bark came again. Dane frowned, gripping the hilt of his dagger as he cautiously made his way toward the source. Outcast Island was supposed to be a refuge, a place where he could live in comfort during migration season. The Empress had made sure to clear the island of any potential threats, leaving it empty. Yet here was a dog, a sign of life, of habitation. Dane rubbed his jaw as he considered the implications. If there were dogs, then there were likely people as well. And if people were here, it meant trouble. Carefully, he crept forward, taking a shallow breath to stave off his ever-present pain. The tunnels were dim, the only illumination coming from the hurricane lantern he carried. Normally, Dane preferred the dim interior of the cave system to the too bright exterior of the island. But now, he found himself wondering what awaited him in the shadows. As he drew closer to the source of the barking, he heard the faint rumble of a voice. Cursing under his breath, Dane ducked behind a large rock, peering around it to get a better look. Claws skittered against stone. A moment later, a fluffy white dog appeared, the canine striding forward as if on a mission. No one accompanied the creature. The dog's head roved from side to side, as if tracking a scent, before trotting purposefully over to Dane. The dog was huge, and Dane took a step back. The beast's head nearly came up to his shoulder. The few dogs Dane had seen in his life were tiny by comparison. Then Dane realized this was no dog at all. It had wings. "An Erelez?" Dane murmured, brow furrowing as he stared at the creature. The canine gave a soft woof, seemingly in confirmation. Then the Erelez turned, bounding a handful of strides before whirling to stare at Dane, as if asking him to follow. Dane hesitated, his hand tightening around the dagger's hilt, then started after the canine. His never-ending pain flared, a sharp lance of agony that made him wince. Dane gritted his teeth, forcing himself to take a step forward. If this creature meant him harm, he would have to be ready to defend himself. But something about the Erelez's gaze seemed almost pleading. Dane took another step, then another, following the fluffy white creature down the dark tunnel. The pain in his leg grew worse with each stride, but Dane pushed onward, driven by curiosity. The tunnel opened into a large cavern, and Dane's breath caught in his throat. There, resting on her side, was a massive blue dragon. Her scales were dull and dark, caked with long-dried blood. Gooseflesh pebbled Dane's arms. This was one of the dragons the Jade Empress had slain, or so he had been told. But as Dane watched, the dragon's pale eye slowly opened. She was alive, and very much aware of his presence. Dane froze, knowing full well what angry, injured dragons were capable of. He eased back a step. The Erelez, however, let out a soft, rumbling bark and trotted over to the dragon's side, pawing at one of her forelegs. The dragon's gaze shifted, focusing on the canine-like creature, and Dane could have sworn he saw a glimmer of recognition. Dane watched, scarcely daring to breathe, as the Erelez settled down next to the dragon, its fluffy tail swishing back and forth. The dragon let out a low, rumbling sigh, and Dane's confusion increased. This was not the behavior of a ferocious predator, but rather that of a wounded, weary creature seeking comfort. Tentatively, Dane took a step forward, his gaze never leaving the dragon's form. He had to know. How was this possible? How could a dragon that the Jade Empress had supposedly slain be alive and here on Outcast Island? The dragon's head lifted, her eyes suddenly seeming to clear. "You are not one of my tormentors." Her voice was a rasp, as if she hadn't used it in ages. Which wasn't far from the truth. 2 months had passed since the battle. She should have been long dead. "No," Dane agreed, watching her intently. "They're gone. I live here alone." He saw no reason to explain his contentious relationship with the Jade Court, how his condition made it a struggle to accompany the Jade Court airships during migration season. "You're Chandra, the seer. How are you here, alive?" "No fate is so immovable that we cannot change it." Chandra flexed her talons as if working out cramps from unused muscles. She glanced at the Elazar. "And sometimes, salvation comes from those you least expect." The canine? Dane had heard the mystic creatures were capable of healing. But this? He nearly shivered at the thought. Dane watched, perplexed, as the Elazar's ears suddenly flattened. The fluffy white creature's hackles raised, its wings flaring out. But the aggression wasn't directed at Dane. Instead, the canine was focused on the dragon. Chandra, for her part, seemed simply irritated by the Elazar's behavior. "Vesper, quiet," she commanded in a low, stern tone. The Elazar, Vesper, immediately fell silent, though his body remained tense, alert. He glanced between Dane and Chandra, an almost uncertain expression in his intelligent eyes. "Forgive him," Chandra said, her gaze shifting to Dane. "Vesper is confused after my long convalescence. He is quite protective." Dane nodded slowly, his mind whirling. He could understand the creature's protectiveness, even if its aggressive display had caught him off guard. But why had it been aimed at the seer if they were companions? "If you're not one of my tormentors, then what are you?" Chandra asked, her tone full of curiosity. Dane forced himself to stand a little taller despite the ache in his leg. "I'm Danelor. I live here, on Outcast Island, while the Jade Court is away on migration." Chandra's brow furrowed slightly. "Hiding, are you?" She sucked in a great breath, then exhaled softly. "Ah, now I see why you must hide." Of course, it was easy for a dragon to discover what he lacked. Dane shook his head. "I'm not hiding, but during migration seasons they travel on airships." He finished the explanation with a shrug, as if it didn't matter to him. Dane hoped the dragon didn't press for more. He didn't want to go into his sensitivity to light and sound. The Jade Court airships, so large and full of so many, were more than he could handle. The seer nodded, as if it all made sense to her. "There are dragons who would attack you for what you are. There are dragons who would kill me for what I'm not," Dane corrected. And while he was strong, his constant pain in human form would always be seen as a great weakness among dragons. But aside from his pain, he wasn't the only one in this situation. "But there are others like me, though everyone else has gone on migration." He hoped he didn't sound envious. Though his only attempt at migration had revealed he couldn't handle the massive airships, the idea of traveling still appealed to him. "You are Jade Court," Chandra murmured. She paused, considering his words. "Then you must know of the prophecy regarding the dragon who isn't, that the Jade Empress seeks." One couldn't be a part of the Jade Court and not know the prophecy. The Jade Empress had become obsessed. "Yes, I know of it." He paused. "The Jade Empress has him." At that news, the agitated Elazar whimpered. Chandra studied Dane with a thoughtful expression, her pale eyes narrowing. "So, The Jade Empress has the dragon who isn't, she murmured, a faint hint of surprise in her voice. Then Chandra's lips curled into a small smile. Perhaps fate is on my side after all. She flexed her claws, the motion almost casual. Dane shifted his weight, wincing as a spike of pain shot through his leg. What do you mean? Chandra's gaze shifted to him, and Dane was unnerved by the intensity of her stare. I need to ensure the dragon who isn't finds his way to the Forgotten Library, she said, her voice low. Will you help me, Dane Law? Dane cocked his head as he considered her words. The Forgotten Library, a place of legend, rumored to hold great and terrible knowledge. And the dragon who isn't, the one the Jade Empress sought. Yes, Dane was Jade Court, but because of his condition, he'd never been considered someone who might actively help the court. But could that change? What if he could prove to everyone that his imperfect form didn't matter? Help you how? Dane asked, his tone guarded. What exactly are you asking of me? Chandra studied him for a long moment, her pale eyes seeming to pierce into his very soul. I sense you are a man with much pain, Danelor, she said softly. Pain that limits you, that keeps you hidden away on this island. I'm not a man, Dane corrected. He buried his annoyance that she correctly perceived his weakness. The dragon chuckled. Fair enough. I sense that's true as well. But I'll keep it simple. I can help you. If you will aid me in ensuring the dragon who isn't reaches the Forgotten Library, I will see to it that you are freed from your pain. Dane blinked, caught off guard by her offer. Freed from his pain? The chronic agony that had plagued him for years, the ache that made even the simplest of tasks a trial. You can do that? He asked, unable to keep the note of desperate hope from his voice. Chandra inclined her head. I can, and so much more, Danalor. All I ask is that you help me in this one task. Dane shivered in anticipation. To be free of the pain that had haunted him for so long. It was a temptation he could scarcely resist. And if this task of hers truly could ensure the dragon who isn't reached the Forgotten Library, then perhaps it was a worthy endeavor. Dane took a deep breath, his gaze meeting Chandra's. Yes, he said, a rush of hope filling him. I'll help you.
Josephine. Jo's boots clicked against the polished marble floor as she and Gretchen strode into the lavish villa's reception area. She didn't want to be here, would much rather be on her airship where she felt at home. But this visit was a necessary evil. A burly man in a crisp suit stepped forward, hand raised to halt their progress. This is as far as you go. Jo squared her shoulders. I'm Captain Josephine Prescott. Mr. Gibson requested this meeting. The bruiser gave a curt nod. I know, but I was referring to her. He jabbed a finger at Gretchen. Gretchen bristled. No way in the abyss are you separating us. Where Jo goes, I go. Those are the rules, the man said, unmoved. Mr. Gibson will see the captain alone. Anger flashed across Gretchen's face, and she opened her mouth, no doubt to unleash a blistering retort. Jo shot her a quelling look before she could speak. It's fine, Gretch. I won't be long. Jo's tone softened. Wait for me here. Gretchen held her gaze for a beat, then exhaled heavily. You know I hate this cloak and dagger shit. Her eyes bored into the bruiser. Just know if anything happens to her, you'll be spitting teeth for a month. The man's expression didn't flicker, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes, as if he doubted Gretchen's words. Clearly, he didn't know she was a healer, and a healer could do as much harm as help. Grudgingly, Gretchen sank onto one of the plush couches, arms folded across her chest. Joe offered her a reassuring smile before turning to follow the bruiser into Gibson's inner sanctum. "Captain Prescott." Across the room, Reginald Gibson rose from one of the armchairs, a welcoming smile on his face. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Please, have a seat." Joe considered refusing the invitation, but knew that would only serve to antagonize the man, and he was not a person she dared anger. Gathering her courage, she crossed the room and lowered herself into the opulent chair, the fabric practically enveloping her. "I trust you received my letter about the Tempest's necessary repairs," she said, getting straight to the point. Gibson studied her from head to toe. He took a sip of his beverage before setting it down once more. "I did, along with the information regarding your request for a change of vocation." He spoke the words with distaste. "I won't be covering the repairs. You can understand why, as the damage wasn't sustained during a dragon hunt." Outrage rose in Joe's throat like bile. She swallowed it back. In her original missive, she hadn't dared explain anything about the Jade Court or talking dragons. She would have either been seen as a lunatic, a drunkard, or a liar. And none of those helped her plight in the slightest. "But," Gibson waved a hand, batting away her protests. "You've reviewed your copy of our contract, I'm sure. I had my solicitor peruse it again." He smiled, a sly sickle of an expression. "I agreed to cover repairs for normal wear and tear, and for damage sustained while on a hunt." "We were shot full of holes by another airship," Joe seethed. The financier shrugged. "Understood, but again, not part of our contract. My hands are tied. I'm so sorry." He wasn't, and it was infuriating. Joe huffed out a breath. "But without those funds, there's no way I can pay the current lease. I sank all I had into the repairs." Gibson steepled his fingers, thoughtful. "That will be quite the problem, won't it?" He nodded. "You should reconsider the other portion of your letter. Hunting dragons. Now, that's a task that gets coin flowing. And a task, may I remind you, the Tempest is well suited for." The idea of hunting dragons once more made a ripple of nausea course through her. Every time Joe considered it, her mind conjured the memory of Elazar on the deck, a harpoon piercing his shoulder as he shifted from dragon to man. All the blood on the Tempest's deck. His blood. She had almost killed her nephew, the very person she had sworn to protect. "No," she said firmly. "I won't be hunting dragons again. Not now, not ever." Gibson regarded her, eyebrows raised. "Is that so?" He leaned back in his chair, head cocked. "May I ask why the change of heart, Captain?" "The Tempest was built for this very purpose." Joe's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "I have my reasons, and they're my own." She refused to divulge the truth about Elazar. That knowledge was too dangerous to share, especially with a man as powerful as Gibson. The financier studied her for a long, tense moment. "I see." He shrugged, a dismissive gesture. "Well, if you're unwilling to return to your original charter, then you're going to have a problem." Joe's breath caught. The Tempest was her life, her home. The thought of being separated from her ship and her crew filled her with a sense of panic. "What are you saying?" she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Gibson leaned forward, his gaze unreadable. "Simply that if you're no longer willing to do the job you were contracted for, then I may have to reconsider our arrangement. The Tempest is, after all, my property." Panic coursed through Joe. Without the Tempest, how would she ever find Elazar and rescue him from the Jade Empress? The ship was her only means of finding him. "You can't do that," she said, hoping she didn't sound too desperate. "The Tempest is my crew's livelihood, our home. We have nowhere else to go." Gibson shrugged again, the motion infuriatingly casual. "Then perhaps it's time to consider your options, Captain Prescott. I'm a reasonable man, but I do have certain expectations." Jo opened her mouth to argue, to plead, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't risk alienating Gibson, not when the fate of the Tempest and, by extension, Elazar hung in the balance. Swallowing her pride, Jo forced herself to nod. I understand. What do you suggest?" Gibson grinned. "I have an option that you might find almost as thrilling as hunting dragons. Have you ever considered smuggling?" Jo's heart sank as Gibson's words registered. The Tempest, a smuggling ship? It wasn't what her crew had signed on for. She had hoped to become a merchant vessel, something that she might be able to talk the crew into. It lacked the adventure and high revenue of dragon hunting, but it was honorable. But the financier's veiled threat hung in the air, a silent warning that her refusal could cost her the Tempest and her crew's livelihoods. "Smuggling," she repeated faintly. Gibson's lips curled into a self-satisfied smile. "I think you'll find that smuggling can be quite lucrative, Captain. Certainly more so than your current arrangement." Oh, Jo knew that firsthand. But it didn't mean it was a life she wished to return to. Jo's jaw tightened. "And what exactly would I be smuggling?" "A little of this, a little of that." Gibson shrugged, dismissive. "The details can be worked out later." Leaving the details for later was a dangerous prospect with someone like Gibson, but Jo saw that at the moment she had little say in the matter. "And what about the repairs? You said you wouldn't cover them." Gibson smiled. "Ah, yes, the repairs." He paused as if considering his words carefully. "Well, if you agree to my alternative proposal, I could be persuaded to lend a hand. Provided, of course, that our arrangement proves mutually beneficial." "I'll need to discuss this with my crew," Jo said, her voice carefully neutral. Gibson's smile widened. Of course. Take all the time you need. But do bear in mind that my offer won't remain on the table indefinitely." Jo nodded stiffly, her mind racing. She couldn't bear the thought of turning the Tempest into a smuggling vessel. But if it was the only way to keep her ship and her crew afloat, she would have to swallow her pride. As she rose from the chair, Gibson spoke again. "Oh, and Captain, do try to keep an open mind. You may find that smuggling has its own rewards." Jo's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to nod. "I'll keep that in mind." With a final nod, Jo turned and made her way back to the reception area, where Gretchen waited anxiously. The moment their eyes met, Gretchen's expression hardened, and Jo knew she would have some difficult conversations ahead.
Kalen stood on the Tempest's deck, Max at his side. The rest of the crew, those who remained after the time the ship had been in port under repairs, stood in a line, eyes on Captain Prescott as she strode across the freshly swabbed deck. The Tempest's repairs had taken far longer than they'd hoped. Once the airship had limped to the nearest port, it became clear that bringing her back to optimal condition would take time. Precious time that it didn't feel like they had. Captain Jo's funds had dried up, going toward the ship's restoration. With an uncertain future and without the prospect of steady pay, several of the crew had already abandoned their posts. Once the Tempest had been repaired, they'd set course for a port called Kingston. Kalen wasn't familiar with it, though others in the crew seemed to know of it. According to Isaac the navigator, their captain had a meeting with some bigwig. Beneath Kalen's feet, the airship vibrated. Anyone else would think it just a normal aspect of the vessel. But Kalen knew differently. Somehow, in some impossible way, the airship was alive, sort of, aware, sapient. Kalen felt it every time he touched any part of the vessel with his bare skin. The Tempest was as eager to leave port as her remaining crew. Now they just needed to know the plan.
I appreciate you all being timely.
Captain Joe began, consulting her pocket watch. She snapped the lid closed, her gaze falling over her crew. Kaylin noted the disappointed crinkle in the corners of her eyes, no doubt pained by the number of deserters. I know everyone is eager to get back in the sky, and I promise we'll do so soon. But first, we must broach the topic of the Tempest's new calling. At that, everyone stilled, curiosity getting the better of them. This had been a point of discussion/gossip for the last few weeks. Some suspected the Tempest would be relegated to a merchant cargo vessel. Others thought she should return to her calling as a dragoneering ship. But those crew members Kaylin knew were delusional. Captain Joe wouldn't hunt another dragon, not after Elazar. So what is it? Ilarana, the airship's blacksmith, asked. Josephine wet her lips, her expression tightening. Kaylin suspected that whatever she was about to say, many would dislike. While on the surface, the Tempest will appear to be a simple cargo airship, we're going to specialize in smuggling. Beside him, Max released a soft gasp of surprise. Kaylin grinned. This is close enough to my idea, he murmured to the Sky Warden. Not at all the same as piracy, Max shot back. But he knew by the tension in her shoulders that Max wasn't comfortable with the idea. Kaylin watched the crew's reactions closely, gauging their responses. As he'd expected, Ilarana was the first to speak up, her lips pursed with distaste. Smuggling, the elven blacksmith scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. That's hardly the kind of work befitting the Tempest and her crew. We're an airship crew, not common criminals. Claire, the cook, nodded in agreement. I have to agree with Ilarana. Smuggling is a dangerous game, one that's more likely to get us all killed than line our pockets. She cast a pointed look at the captain. We're not trained for that kind of work. It was Justice, the hulking Nosson dragoneer, who voiced the concern Kaylin knew they were all thinking. He stepped forward, his deep voice rumbling. Captain, with respect, this doesn't feel right. Justice's dark gaze swept over the gathered crew, his long horns arcing with the movement. We're meant to hunt and fight dragons, not engage in unlawful activities. Smuggling, no matter how you dress it up, is still a crime. Josephine held up a hand, silencing the murmurs of agreement. I understand your reservations, she said, her gaze steady. Believe me, this isn't a decision I've made lightly. But the fact is, the Tempest can no longer function as a dragoneering vessel. Not after what happened. Her voice nearly cracked at the end, the only loss of resolve she'd displayed so far. More murmurs arose from the assembled crew. We need funds to keep the Tempest airborne, to continue our search. Josephine's voice took on a steely edge. Smuggling, while not ideal, is the surest way to recoup our losses and keep this ship and crew afloat. She lifted her chin. And I respect that some of you disagree with this plan. You are welcome to disembark and find work elsewhere. There was a moment of absolute quiet, only punctuated by the calls of seagulls and the rustling of canvas balloon sails. Then, one by one, crew members stepped out of line. First was Claire and her son Oscar. She approached the captain and ducked her head in apology. I'm sorry, Cap. Claire's voice was regretful. I've lasted as long as I could, but... She shook her head. Say no more, Captain Josephine said, her tone neutral. They were only the first of many. Kaylin scowled, his irritation growing as one after the other crew made their excuses and departed. Halifaran followed Claire, then Justice, Ilarana, and Jolly. When all was said and done, only 6 remained. The captain herself, Gretchen, Kaylin, Maxine, Isaac, and Galatea. Well, this will be a challenge, Captain Joe murmured, her stance relaxing. Defeat was evident in the way her shoulders drooped. Yeah, well, we're not used to things being easy. Kaylin shrugged. So, how do we do this? He eyed their group. Do we call dibs on what we want to do? A wry smile graced the captain's lips. I don't think so, Airship Dragon. She exhaled softly, studying them. I've already given some thought to the needs of the Tempest in the event we have slim pickings for the crew. Inwardly, Kaylin growled. She had suspected so many would leave. It had been a surprise to him. Josephine studied them. I'll take over from Halifaran, serving as both captain and pilot. She nodded to Isaac. You'll remain navigator, of course, though now you'll also have command of the ship in my absence, as well as piloting. Isaac gave a curt nod. Kalen had been surprised he'd stayed after his earlier outburst. Aye, just like old times. Captain Joe flashed a brief smile, then turned to the rest of them. Galatea, you'll continue with your work as engineer. The Thelian's ears perked up at this, her posture rigid. Before the mutiny, she had simply been a deckhand. Galatea had taken it upon herself to learn more about the Tempest's engine room. But even Kalen knew that for her, this was officially quite the promotion. It will be my honor, Captain. A relieved smile touched the captain's face as she turned to Gretchen. Since we won't need as much of your medical expertise, I hope, I'll need you to serve as bosun. A tight-lipped smile crossed the healer's face. Like old times, indeed. Before Kalen could wonder what Gretchen and Isaac meant by that, Josephine's focus was on him. And for you, my airship dragon, I think you'll serve well as the marshal. Kalen blinked, taking a moment to comprehend what she was saying. The marshal handled all of the ship's defenses, which might become even more necessary if they ran into any problems on a smuggling run. He wanted to question her assignment, but with a start, he realized he had come full circle. Kalen had served as a sentinel for Chandra. This was a task he had trained for. Sure, if you want a dragon in charge of something like that, he agreed with a lazy shrug. Wouldn't do to seem too satisfied by the position. I do, Josephine said, a glint in her eyes hinting that she saw right through him. And Maxine. Of course, you'll still serve as Sky Warden. But now I'll also need you to serve as lookout and relay any important navigational information to Isaac, Captain Joe said. Maxine nodded, her ebony curls waving with the movement. I can do that. Relief lit Josephine's eyes, which Kalen counted as a win. Hopefully she didn't think their outlook was as bleak now. Josephine took a step back. You all have your new assignments. I'll give you the rest of the day to prepare, and tomorrow we'll head out on our first run.